From living in the rainforest with no house and no running water to running a startup in Manhattan and exiting to a large yellow social app. And since coaching amazing founders globally. Hi, I'm Bonny Morlak and welcome to my most unpredictable and vulnerable conversation yet. Yep, we're talking about my journey. We'll get into the real stuff. Mindset, resilience, self-worth, relationships and clarity. I'm sitting down with my good friend and pro podcaster Harry Strauss to go deep on who I am, what I do, and what motivates me to spend my time helping founders not just survive, but thrive. So, if you're a founder, a creative, intelligent, and ambitious human being trying to build something meaningful, stick around. This one's for you.
I hope you're ready.
As ready as I can be, man.
Excellent. So let's start with the basics, because the whole point of this is for people to find out all about you, right?
All right.
So who are you and what do you do is where we want to begin with this.
All right, where do I start? My name is Bonny Morlak and I'm a startup coach. I used to be German, but I'm better now. I've had a long life and I had many lives, so I won't go into detail here, but I grew up in Germany, moved over here, did a lot of things, had a lot of startups, and eventually sold my last startup and became a startup coach. That's what I truly want to do. It fulfills me, and it's an incredible job and allows me to live in abundance.
Beautiful. It's an interesting word that you use there, abundance.
Yeah.
You like that word, don't you?
I love that word because money is such a narrow term, and money really doesn't mean anything. Money is a social construct based on trust, right? It's like, without trust, I give you $20. If you don't trust that that piece of paper is worth anything, or the person you want to pay with that $20 doesn't have trust in it, it evaporates. And if you strand on an island with a bag of cash, it means nothing. So money is also more or less an amplifier of who you are. And just having money, there's still a lot of things outside of that mean so much to me. And I want to have these things in abundance. So if I was sitting on Mars with $20 billion, it would mean nothing because I love blue skies and I love trees and I love nature and so on and so on. So what do I want to have in abundance in my life is super, super important to it. And money is certainly one part of it, no doubt. But there's a lot of things outside of that, especially in terms of relationships with people and good conversations and happiness and so on and so on.
I want to ask you just before we continue, because I'm having so many thoughts as you're talking there.
Yeah.
Because that word abundance, I know it's kind of central to the way we've spoken over the years we've known each other. When you're working with founders, when you're doing that work, how often do you work with people that are maybe money focused and they don't know what they're doing with the rest of it? And how important is it figuring that out to being successful in your business and in your life?
I think that's a super good question. Over the years, I've found at first I give founders what they want, and then I shift slowly to give them what they need.
What does that mean?
Well, they have very specific problems when they come to me. And if I talk all esoteric and, love and all that stuff and happiness, they don't want to hear that. They're not open for that often. And they have this one thing that's really painful. Like, imagine the ambulance arrives at the hospital. You have to stop the bleed first, right? Then you can operate, and then you can start healing. And for the coaching process, it's very similar. You have to so what's your problem? And often there's conflict between the founders, or they're running out of money, or they don't get customers fast enough, or there's some real world problem. Their marketing doesn't work, or they have problems with their investors, or whatever. There's always something. Kitchen is always on fire, right? So, and then I come in and I can help them with that, and when they stop the bleeding, when the ship is a little bit out of the storm, then we can see what the structure is of the business, and then we can start working on the people, because I help building people, and the people build the companies. So it's very much about who you are as a human being as to what your company will turn out.
Right. Okay. That's interesting, and that sounds quite appealing, to be honest. If I was because everyone's got that immediate pressing issue, right? That thing that makes you feel like all the buzzwords and catchphrases that you hear just don't mean anything to you because all you
Not
can
at
think
that
about
moment, no.
exactly. So I guess to know that you're pragmatic enough to go, okay, I acknowledge and accept that's immediate, but we can quickly evolve this into something that kind of flourishes, right?
Yeah, I've made enough mistakes in my life.
Okay.
I've got scars. I've had many failures. Lost my house, had to work for the man, all sorts of things. So from that perspective, I think I learned a lot more through failure than through success. Success is often more being at the right time, at the right place sort of thing, a lot of luck in that.
Right.
But I made fundamental mistakes and then learned the hard way. So now I can help founders not to repeat these mistakes. And I tell you what, most of the problems are, when you sort of unravel the problems, they come back to how people feel about themselves, how they present themselves, how they see relationship, how they, like when you think you're in a B2B sales, for example, you never talk to a business, you talk to a human being on the other side of the table, and stripping everything back to that. And for that, you need to be fully aware who you are as a human being, because if I can trigger you, I will quickly find out that you have some trauma about your father or whatever, there's a lot of examples right there at the moment in the US, I would say. Sure. There are people who have clearly haven't been loved enough or hugged enough as children, and then I can play you, or the people on the other end of the negotiation table, they figure that out in a heartbeat, and then they can manipulate you. And you want to be aware of these things first, like who am I, what triggers me, and so on and so on. And then see that in others, and now you can sit down and have a meaningful conversation. Yeah. And sell something to that human being on the other side, and really understand what their pain points are, and really understand what your product should solve, and so on and so on. Yeah.
You said something just there, which is, it's important to figure out who am I. And I'm guessing that's something you're going to had to have done for yourself to be able to do that for other people.
Still doing it, mate.
Indeed. So I guess I want to ask you about that journey to an extent. I mean, I know that you once said in passing to me that you lived in the rainforest for a while. And I always wanted to ask you more about that. So I'm definitely going to take that opportunity in this interview. And then I know that you did quite well for yourself you exited out of a company, you sold to a large corporation that I cannot say the name of, but they're massive and have a yellow logo. Can I say that?
You can say that.
Okay, cool. Great.
The rest is under NDA.
People can sort of figure that out. But before we go on that journey, I want to ask, what was a young Bonny like? What was Bonny the kid like? How do you compare yourself now to the young man that you once were?
Oh, the young kid. I think everybody in the village. I grew up in a village. I grew up in a farm village. I used to drive tractors and milk cows and and roam the fields. I was always the odd one out, right? Sort of thing. I had very curly hair. That was already strange. Everybody around me looked more like you, blonde, and I had dark curls, and I was always a bit different to most others. Also, by the time we were semi-settled, I moved 9 times. I've been to 9 different schools. When I get all those class reunion emails, I get 9 a year sort of thing, right? So it was already different, and I figured out very quickly that when you have something that you perceive as something negative about yourself or a weakness, you can turn that around. So I just doubled down on being different. Right.
Did that further ostracize you, or did it help you find your people?
Luckily, I was charming and funny. I was the class clown, a bit of a people pleaser. I also always had a bit of a sense on how people feel, so I could sort of tune into their conversation, and which was also sharpened through moving through so many schools. I met so many people. I had to remake friends all the time, that I learned how to blend in and how to figure out what the other person actually feels. So my empathy gland sort of grew, large at that time. And I must say that at the very beginning, I had to negotiate bullies a lot, and I was a skinny kid on the schoolyard, and I used that empathy to understand what the bully's greatest weakness was, and I let him know that I could destroy him with one sentence and reduce him to tears if he was ever going to threaten me, and then they started protecting me. So that was sort of a pretty toxic way of using that but it helped me, and thank you, Bonnie, from the past for those skills. And over time I have started using them in a more empathetic, helpful way in understanding people better. So highly tuned into other people's emotions. And always sort of, see, I'm born in Germany 20 years after the war, and we were highly trained in critical thinking. And like right now, stuff happens in Germany that shows me that's not the case anymore, but at least my generation, I'm born in 65, we were sort of made sure to critically think about everything, right? And I think that still helps me today.
Let's get into the journey, because I want to. It's hard to navigate this because I know you've done so much. And
how much time?
This is the thing. We got to keep this interesting for people. And I know you've said to me before, I've had many lives. So let's pick a few of those lives, the ones that were most significant to developing who you are today, your ethos today.
Yes.
Build me up to the jungle, I guess. Build me up to living in the rainforest, because that's the experience I'm dying to hear about, to be honest with you. I want to know.
Let me just quickly build up to that.
Please,
so,
please.
I had many careers, many lives. I started as a shop window dresser in Hamburg, Germany.
Right. Okay.
And
flair for design.
Yes, and I've always been no more going into the actual shop window and making something interesting there. From that, I went to the movies. I've been a stage cowboy for a long time in movie studios, and I traveled the world a lot, like 3 years, and eventually, with one of my girlfriends, she fell pregnant, and we married, and we decided to move to Australia. So I arrived in Australia, first in Darwin. It was a little bit too hot for me. Then went to the Sunshine Coast, Noosa. And now I had to do something, and there was no real place for set designers there. So I started this new thing, the internet. Did some web design, built a company, had employees, blah, 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 blah. And then from that, sort of the early days of startup culture in the 2000s, sort of online ideas, people sort of around me did a lot of cool things, and I sort of like, I want to do this as well. And I started, before the term startup was really coined, having startups over there. And the real estate market in Australia, just ballooned, and one day my house was worth so much, and we decided to sell it and look for the next upgrade. And then the real estate agent, that guy came to me and said, Bonnie, I've got something for you, but I don't think it's what you're looking for, but I want to show you anyway. So he drove me like up the mountains in the hinterland of the Sunshine Coast, and we entered this magnificent rainforest. And I say, where's the house? He said, there's no house. I said, there's 12 acres rainforest. There's a little bit of cleared land. I just wanted to show to you. And I bought it on the spot right there.
God.
I didn't even call my wife. And
I bet that went down well.
Yeah. Well, we got divorced in the end. And I don't think it was based on that decision, but it was it was definitely not helping.
Funny to say it like that, though, I suppose.
Well, I mean, people grow apart, and we are still best friends, and we have been really good parents.
Yeah.
We just don't live together, and we don't spend time together. But once in a while we meet, at my son's wedding or something, and we're having a laugh. So she's all right. Anyway, so I lived there for 3.5 years with a young family, with a 3.5-year-old and an 8-year-old. And So there's one side of the property was towards the village. It was 300 meters more rainforest, and behind was 42,000 hectares of rainforest.
Wow.
So I told the kids to only play in that direction because this is actually quite dangerous.
Yeah.
And when they stayed with mum, later on they stayed by the beach. You know, they had a jetty. They had to go on a boat, go fishing before breakfast. And at my place, they did the whole, Tarzan thing, swinging from tree to tree and building cubby houses. And we had chickens, and we lived off the land, like composting toilet, cooking on fire, having a water tank, and growing our own food, like the
Wow.
total hippie thing.
What was it about that because you made the decision so fast to change your whole lifestyle, what was it about that appealed to you? How did you do that?
Love on first sight, man.
Really?
Yeah, it's like, it was just something in my heart, just it expanded so wide, and I suddenly felt I'm so at home and so at the right place. And that was challenged many times later, especially in the rain season and stuff. Like they say, if you don't like the rain, don't move into a rainforest, which, is true. But it was amazing. So we had a deck and a roof, no walls, and like exposed to the elements, and I grew so healthy, like not just physically, because like cold showers in the morning. Well, it's 5 degrees in the morning Celsius. You have a cold shower from the water tank. I was so healthy. I didn't have colds anymore, anything. But you also so grow in tune with the phases of the moon and the birds and the trees and the seasons, and it's just so wholesome.
Wow.
It really fundamentally healed my soul. Despite all the challenges. So yeah, and I know where you want to go from here, I guess, because like not much after that, I found myself in the penthouse on the 61st floor, living in Manhattan, as a CEO of my startup, and that was quite a shift.
It sounds like the opening of a movie. You're sort of in this cold Manhattan apartment, and then it cuts to you living in this luscious sort of rainforest environment. Like, it's quite a startling contrast.
Well, it was both lush in its own way,
true. The concrete jungle.
Yeah, so the rainforest is a really aggressive place. Everything wants to eat you, right? Like everything. And that's not different in Manhattan. Like, it's just a different group of animals, I guess. So I felt, in a way, spiritually prepared for Manhattan. And
that's so interesting.
It is. They're both really beautiful places in their own right. I really loved living there, and I found the true luxury in a big city is living high up, because it gets really quiet. So that, and 61st floor, man, like you had to pop your ears when you used the elevator. That's how high it was. It was crazy. I could see the ocean liners coming like over the Atlantic into New York Harbor. I could see the Statue of Liberty, the financial district. It was a real ride.
Okay, so you're in Manhattan.
Yes.
It's a complete change up. I guess I want to bridge that rainforest experience into Manhattan. You've already said it kind of prepared you for it. Can you talk a little bit more about how it prepared you for it, and then take me on the journey there with your business and everything?
Well, yeah. So that song, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of truth to that song. It's a pretty tough place. It's also a pretty loving place. It's sort of, people are real, and me having a German background, I lived in San Francisco for a little while and found that people are super polite, and I find it hard to deal with that because I never really know what that really mean, because I didn't have that training, and like Germans are very blunt, right?
Yeah. Not actually that dissimilar. Brits are polite, but we're still kind of blunt as well. Like, you can be
after 1 or 2 beers.
Definitely a couple of beers. Right,
so
bang on.
So New York was really my jam. Like, and people like are very direct, but also really warm-hearted. So like, I had this one experience that there was this Mexican mother with a little child and a pram and a baby in the pram, right? And then coming out of the subway and like the stairs up, and there was this dude listening to death metal, like you could hear it, and like 50,000 earrings, nose rings, tattoos up to the neck, everything, just walking up, just grabbing the pram and carrying it up and putting it down up at the end, not even looking back, just the right thing to do, and that's like, this is my city, man. This is really beautiful. And when I ask somebody for their opinion, I want it straight. I don't want to have some sugar coating on that. So New York, you need to be strong in who you are. You have to sort of pick your lane and stick to it, right? And you see everybody is doing something. Everybody is sort of, like if they have an a cappella group or a yoga class, or they have a startup, or they do acrobatics in the park, everybody does something. Everybody hustles, right? Mm-hmm. And so like in terms of startup culture, that was actually really, really cool. So I was just on my lane, and everybody respects that okay, you want to do something, let's do it. So, and if you are not really who you are, if you're not really centered in who you truly are, that can throw you very quickly, because there's so many influences and so many strong influences. So if you don't know who you are and where you want to go, it's hard, right? So, but from that rainforest experience, I had a lot of time with myself and a lot of time to clean up my shit. I'm still doing it. Like, I don't want to pretend that I'm done, but I went through a lot of stuff, sort of my blind spots and who I truly am and what is me and what is other people's issues and how much I have inherited as a German, and a massive amount of guilt that sort of directed me everywhere. And then at one stage I found that that's actually not my guilt at all. And so that rainforest time, meditating amongst the bamboo sort of stuff, that really helped. That really, really helped. And then in Manhattan, I had that bubble of calmness around me, and that I could use.
Beautiful. And talk me through your experience there with the business and how you got into that and what happened.
As I said, I had a startup in the rainforest. Literally,
right.
I had a little phone line all the way to the deck, with a modem, and I had internet. I didn't have running water, but I had internet.
Which is more important today.
And then sort of going to business meetings from the rainforest, putting on my suit, and then driving to the next city and having, that was interesting.
Yeah.
And some of them failed, and some of them was like okay-ish. But at one stage, I lost everything. I lived somewhere else briefly already, and I lost my house, more or less. So I went to one of my friends who had a software company, and I asked, hey, can I work for you? Sales, that's something I can do. He said, nah, I don't need anybody. I said, can I work for a week for free? And I did well in that week, and he hired me, and then next 6 months I became the chief revenue officer of that company and helped them raise money, sort of like that hire. Like, there was already like 17 employees, and they got millions of dollars of investment. So I sort of had a taste of the bigger startup world there. But sales is not really, I'm good at it, but I don't love it.
Okay.
And design, and then I read an ad in the paper. Yes, I still read papers at that time. That said, looking for UX designer must be good. And so like, what an idiot thing to put in the paper. So I wanted to see the guy, and there was this dude, Ben, who turned out to be my co-founder for almost a decade later on, who exited with his startup. He traveled the world, and he wrote down problems that he wanted to solve, 736 altogether. He whittled it down to 5, and he sat in this house by the beach, and he had a programmer in each room that were working on one of the ideas. There were groupies floating in the pool. He was blending his pizza and his Coke, so he was having a hypothesis that it saves chewing. And like, he was doing everything, like this is really interesting. So we had this startup idea, and whether I could help him with the UX UI, and I did, and we sort of became friends very quickly, because he is crazy intelligent, and he sort of helped me understand Asperger's a little bit better. He's very high functioning, and he taught me a lot about that, and that was really interesting. He said, like, I actually need a CEO for this startup, because this seems to be the good one, and you're good with people, I'm not, but I'm good with tech, you're not, so let's be co-founders. And we co-founded this whole thing, and it was a e-commerce solution for social media, and we submitted it to a startup competition in France, Publicis Group, like a massive advertising company. And they had 76,000 employees globally, and they were the judges of the startup ideas. So I thought like, hey, let's test our idea with the target group for free. Right? So, it goes over their desk. That can only be good for us. Well, a few weeks later, I got an email, do you have anything on the 1st of June? Keep the date free. And then they sent me a ticket, and then they flew me to Paris. Long story short, out of 3,500 startups, we won gold and 100,000 euros, and on stage in Paris.
Yeah.
And it was pretty cool. And on the back of that, I used Austrade, which is an Australian trade organization that helps startups overseas. And they had a landing pad in San Francisco, and we worked from there for a while, blah, blah, blah. And then moved to New York because our first customer base was largely fashion businesses. And there's no fashion in San Francisco, unless you talk about Patagonia vests and Allbirds shoes.
Plain hoodies.
Yeah, and so went to New York and built our startup there, and had a team. Our programmers were in Australia, and the sales team was in the US, basically.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And I want to know about how that kind of reached its pinnacle. I guess I know that this isn't strictly. It is relevant in a sense. People can hear this and they'll go, "Oh, Bonny's actually credible. He's done this stuff." But I know in terms of the ethos side of things, I don't know how much it contributed to it. But I would love to hear about just the whole exit from that, and then we can go from there with the whole coaching thing.
So I think one of the biggest lessons for me is, Bonny, be yourself.
Right.
Don't try to be anybody else. And it was very tempting over there. Even so, I arrived there like in a very healthy manner emotionally. There was sort of this, this is how they do business over here. This is a New York thing, and sort of I accepted some toxic behavior from some key people that I shouldn't have accepted. Like my gut feeling told me this is not right. But I go, oh well, I'm in America now, and this is New York, and it's dog eat dog. That's what they do, right? And that's not true.
Did you sort of feel that the pressure to play up to that stereotype?
Yeah, so I was sort of like, I ignored those red flags as, that's how it's done over here. And it wasn't. It wasn't right. So there was a lot of stress based on that, so dealing with some people that, stakeholders that try to sort of steer the company in a certain direction, and they had a lot of influence because they put, a substantial amount of money in it. And so most of them were brilliant and beautiful, but there was one particular person that wasn't so helpful.
Right.
And navigating that, when you say what was the pinnacle, there was a lot of really high highs and really low lows, and and it wasn't always rainbows and sunshine, for sure. It's and you have to be, and it really showed me how strong you have to be, and as like in yourself, but also how strong your relationships need to be, because a man is not an island, right? Like you want to have solid relationships as well, and that became really, really important for me.
You reminded me of that movie About a Boy, when there's the opening monologue and he goes, "I am an island, I'm effing Ibiza," and it's so funny because it's such a classic thing to say, but so many people these days that you see. I know you talk quite a bit about toxic masculinity and things like that, and I think
I'm sorry, but let me interrupt you right here. I do not like the term toxic masculinity.
Sure, yeah, you have said that to me, yeah.
Because the people who really need to hear it, what that means,
turns them off, right?
That turns them off straight away, and they stop listening, they start arguing. And
which I actually can understand as well.
So do I. There's nothing wrong with men. Men are very important, very beautiful, and I think the term is a little bit unlucky, but sort of it is associated with male stereotypes. So toxic behavior, and it's in all genders, men and women, and everything in between.
Yeah.
So it's not a man thing. It's about the toxic behavior. So I'm trying to avoid that term.
Yeah.
It's sort of I'm a little bit over it.
Yeah, sure.
Everybody can have toxic behavior. And Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's
right
okay. That's okay. No, I was just going to say that I know you've spoken quite a bit about that sort of culture of masculine traits that become unhelpful or unhealthy.
Yeah.
And you see so much of it in today's world. You know, people promoting this idea of being a lone wolf, being, you know, this unbreakable individual that doesn't need emotion or doesn't need to rely on other people or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it's just really interesting that saying "no man is an island" has never been more useful, probably, but it's such an old one at the same time.
Very much so, man. And there has been a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of stuff has been compounded through COVID, and there's some very toxic macho behavior has become quite common, and we see something at the highest places in office in the US, for example. You know, there's some really unhealthy stuff going on and some real toxic behavior. And I think that a lot of people were lost, you know, and a lot of people, especially young men, they have been trained to, you know, provide and, you know, be strong, you know, boys don't cry and all that stuff. And they more and more find themselves in a world where they don't have control over their lives. It doesn't matter how hard you grind, you can't buy a house. You know, if your parents didn't own a house, you forget it, you know. So, and the only place where they have control over anything is maybe in the gym. So they go to the gym and like you have like, look at this, you know, like things are growing. I know you go to the gym and there is something good about this, you know. And from there there were people sort of talking about be more vulnerable, or, you know, this is how you date and dating advice. And all these people came up and they've turned more and more and more toxic in a way, all the way to the Andrew Tates of this world, you know, like almost dismiss women as objects. And it totally went overboard. And to the point where an Elon Musk and a Zuckerberg want to challenge each other to a cage fight, like the most unlucky the most unlikely people on the planet that should have a cage. So it's like, and I feel that there's a lot of people who were the nerds at school, you know, who were bullied, and now they overcompensate to a hyper masculinity sort of thing. So that's one thing. But there's also this, when you accept investment, you have people breathing down your neck to get your numbers up as quickly as possible, right? And this grinding culture, and especially in the US, if you work hard, you can make it sort of fantasy, you know, which is untrue, you know. So working harder never solves anything. Like, it's always working smarter that really moves the needle, right? So, but there's this culture, and if you don't work 60 hours a week, you're not a good founder. If you don't grind hard until you bleed out of your eyes, you're not a good founder. And that's bullshit, you know. And like the founders I'm working with, we sort of dial that back, rather remove a lot of the noise, let them focus on what's really important, let them go home at normal times, have good relationships, and actually achieve so much more and be more peaceful, and also be more aware of this world. I mean, you're building a product for this world. You have to be in it. You can't sit like in your office at midnight. You know, you're not in this world. You know, you're not participating. You need to be at a healthy place to make good products.
Yeah. So you exit the business, you move into coaching.
It's sort of a gradual.
Yeah, it's a gradual progression.
Crossfade.
I guess I want to understand why you chose coaching. I really want to ask you this before I forget, because you said a couple of things in the build up to all this that struck me in just that conversation we had just then. You talked before about how you had that opportunity to go and live in the wilderness essentially, and figure out what worked for a lot of the stuff that had happened in your life, figure out what was important to you. And so you arrive in this place like New York, which you described, there's all these different things happening, different things can pull you in different directions. And then you just mentioned as well this concept of modern masculinity and the rise of these sort of populist characters that will give you a very strict set way to do things. It's almost like, don't worry about figuring out this stuff, just do this. This is what strong men do, just do that. So what would you say to people, one, that are in that position of they're firefighting right now, like what you talked about before. They've got these problems, they're trying to just get past this initial problem. How do those people find the space to figure out what's important and make the right choices? And then I want to just progress to talking about coaching in general and that whole thing, because that I had that in my head. I really want to ask you about.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and probably can't be answered in a short answer. You sort of got to get them into safety first, into calmer waters. So what I do at first, I grab a bucket and help firefighting, until you to a point where you go like, let's have a glass of water, let's step back. So at the very beginning, and that can be a few weeks, where you just like really in the trenches with them and figure out stuff. And and because I've been a CEO many times, and I had employees, and I raised money, and I've been through a lot of the things that they are going through, and there are some shortcuts and tricks and tips that I can help them with, and mainly around structure and focus. Not everything is important, and most things are urgent. That's sort of filtering out. Sometimes even the thing that they think right now is a massive problem might not actually be, like they might ask the wrong question and try to, like with all their might, do that. But at first they don't know that. So I help, and then until it's a bit calmer, and then we step back, maybe 2 steps, and look at everything and go like, all right, and then we figure out who they truly are, and that's a very fast exercise.
Yeah.
And like, what does winning look like for you? Like, and sort of clean out stuff and restructure the company a little bit, maybe get them out of micromanaging into trusting people more, and like little things like that. So to get them more breathing space. And then we start rebuilding how they do business, how they grow. And it really depends on the stage of the startup as well.
Yeah, okay.
How many people you have.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because I think one of the biggest what's the word I'm looking for? The most resistance you probably find to this stuff is that people kind of think, well, I just can't do it.
I don't have the bandwidth for this.
Yeah, exactly.
Meditating, are you crazy?
Exactly.
I don't have time to meditate.
100%.
Yeah, so like maybe you don't have time to not meditate. But that's where I arrive. Like
exactly.
As I said, the kitchen is on fire.
Yeah.
You don't talk about interior design. You talk about grabbing a bucket of water and help. Taking the fire down.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, I want to know about the why, coaching startups. So what made you take the leap after all that experience? It
wasn't so much a leap. It was more of in movies, a crossfade. So I've been in many like accelerators over in the States, the landing pad from Austrade, and in a place called Rocket Space, where Uber and Airbnb started before they went to YC. And so it was really interesting places. There were all these startup founders with me, a lot of Australians, Americans, other countries. And everybody hustled really hard all week. That I fell into that as well, like that whole startup culture. If anybody asked you, hey, Harry, how are you going? Like, oh, you're killing it, right? So, and on a Friday afternoon, bottle of beer, letting your hair down, everybody had problems. And, then we shared them amongst each other. And I was often the oldest in the room, sort of. And I've been personally through a burnout, like with clinical depression, and I managed that ever since. So I know a thing or two about pushing it too hard. The answer of working harder is not always the answer, because like you can only bend it so much until it breaks, and then it fucks up everything. Like nothing fucks up your startup as quickly as running out of happiness.
Right.
And I've been there, and I know it. I know what that feels like, and I know all the signs and red flags along the way. So I could sort of talk to these other founders and sort of share my experience, and so I started coaching before I even knew that I was coaching. And at one stage I came across a principle called Ikigai. There's a book out there now called Ikigai. And it's basically a Venn diagram with 4 circles, right? And first circle is what makes you truly happy, what gives you the spark of joy. Second one is what are you good at? What are your talents? What are your skills? And the third circle is what change do you want to see in the world? And the fourth circle is what can you get paid for?
Yeah.
Right? So, and whatever you do in life sort of should touch all four circles equally at best, or at least all four in some shape or form. And I realized that towards the end of exiting my startup that one circle was missing for me, and that was the change I want to see in the world. Like, essentially, I had a lot of fun. I was good at it. I
got paid for it.
I got paid for it, like enough to afford a apartment in the 61st floor. But it just sold more shit to more people. It was sort of like a real pushing product out there, and especially fashion, and fast fashion is the greatest polluter on planet, second greatest polluter on the planet, and I was not helping. I was sort of like doing the opposite,
Yeah.
And I felt this emptiness, like that. I didn't feel like I did something meaningful, and I don't want to be ungrateful. It was a beautiful time. It was wonderful. I learned a lot. I had a ball, right? But there was this niggling little voice in the back of my head. Hey, Bonny, what the fuck are you doing here? Like you're selling more shit, and like you lived in the rainforest, and you're trying to be all hippie and green, and now you do the opposite. That's something wrong here. So, and I did my ikigai, and so there's different ways of doing it, and sort of listing out what it is you love, what you're good at, and find that out, and coaching basically was right in the center there for me. While the getting paid for part wasn't quite figured out, but I thought that with the people I know in the network and so on, I will figure it out. It was also the time in my life where I switched from thinking about money as a currency and to thinking about trust as a currency.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this because it's something I've heard you say before.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, it's anyone who just hears that, it's hard to contextualize it because trust is obviously built over time.
Yeah.
But talk about what you mean by that when you say.
Yeah. So ultimately, as human beings, really all we have relating to others is trust. Like it's literally the ultimate currency between human being, and then we sort of transpose that trust to other things, to other instruments, to other methods. Like money is a social construct built on trust. Money doesn't exist. It's nothing if you don't trust that this thing here buys you something in that shop. It's nothing. If I don't trust that bank will give me my money back when I put it in it, like the whole system collapses. Stock market goes up and down. Like molecule for molecule, nothing has changed with the company, and the value goes up and it goes down. It's just trust. So, and the trust between two human beings is probably the most important ingredient for any relationship. Trust and respect, really. Without that, you don't have a relationship. So I sort of realized that more and more because I built such beautiful relationships that at the end of the day, if you don't trust somebody, things get so hard, and you see that often between the investors and the founders, they have 300-page contracts, and there's like they just don't trust each other, and the relationship just goes worse and worse and worse over time. And no contract in the world can really replace trust. But if I trust you like a brother, then we just have to just wink at each other and it'll be fine, or like have a handshake or whatever, and so it's worth a lot more. It saves a lot of money, it saves a lot of effort and blood, sweat, and tears. So I found that essentially building trust builds relationship with people, and on that businesses are built. So once I shifted my focus from money to just have genuine, authentic, vulnerable relationship with other human beings that sort of fit I want to be magnetic to people that I really like interacting with. So number one was for me removing toxic relationships out of my life, so I have more space for really beautiful people, and in the founder community, there's a lot of really, really cool people there, and they're really, really amazing. So, and I started to foster those relationships, starting with me being vulnerable, starting with me sort of, being authentic and just warts and all, this is me, not trying to pretend I'm somebody else or more than I actually am. And then that usually opens up the other side, and then, sort of the trust builds, and business just flows from that. And not being transactional. I don't need you and then like, okay, you trust me, I trust you, and then we will do business or something. No, it's not like that. I never expect anything back, and I sort of want to pay forward as much as I can. So many people, beautiful people, have helped me. And when I was, blue-eyed and bushy-tailed in the startup world, and they never asked for anything in return. And so that's a beautiful culture. And I'm doing a lot of that as well. But through some miracle, and through more complicated ways, things come back to me as well. And then it's up to me to accept that, actually. That was the next thing I had to learn, is to not just give. If there was only givers on the planet, that wouldn't work, because you need receivers as well, you need takers. So give and take, when somebody generally brings something my way, to not say, oh, no, that's okay. Like, oh, thank you. That's really, really nice of you. Thanks for that gift, and accept it as well. And build on that, I more and more moved into that coaching role and educated myself more and trained more and structured it more. And I did the Ikigai with other people, and I developed it further and further. That's when I shifted from what can you get paid for to what do you want to see in abundance in your life. Maybe it's fresh air, maybe it's good barbecues. I don't know, like maybe things that don't have anything to do with money.
Yeah, well, I'd like to speak a bit from my experience there, because I think that you getting me to do the Ikigai, I did your the video one, you have the walkthrough guided one.
Oh yeah.
Which was fantastic. Yeah. It was so good to have someone actually, because I can get distracted easily. It was so good to have someone actually working with me through it, talking me through it, engaging with me on it. But I think for me, the beauty of that was the clarity it gave me, for one, but for two, it made me realize that I was not aiming big enough. I was like almost afraid to aim too big, or like, because especially the bit where it says the change you want to see in the world sounds so overwhelming and so almost ridiculous that I could have a significant impact. Yeah. So for me, doing that was actually really, really powerful. I enjoyed it. It meant I genuinely relished doing it. Yeah. But I did, and the bit you helped me a bit with was I came away from it. I did sort of feel like, yeah, but I'm not actually going to be able to do that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I had the same feeling. You have to sort of grow into it. But one of the things that I find very important is that it's more important to understand where you want to go than how to get there. And there are a few reasons for that, and they can get quite complex in a psychological level. But a lot of people get their direction from where they earn the most. That's the first direction. Or the opportunities that are presented to themselves, without a system as to filtering out which opportunity is actually getting you away from who you are, rather than letting you be who you are. Like, let's just say my father has a panel beater shop, and he's got like 4 shops across town, and he wants to retire. Say, hey, Bonny, this will all be yours, panel beating. And it would be so sweet of him, right? And at that moment, and I would be clear for life. I would have enough money to do what I want and have 4 panel beater shops or something like that. But at that moment to say, hey, thanks, Dad, that is so beautiful of you. However, I have to decline because this is not me. This is not what I want to do with my life.
Yeah.
That. Saying no to the wrong opportunities.
I alluded to some stuff at the beginning that you said to me, and one of the big ones was saying, because I had always kind of grown up with the ethos of you have to try and work with everybody, you have to just try and make everything work, everyone's got something good to offer. So this concept of like actually saying no to stuff, in life, yes, but in a business context, I definitely hadn't really I mean, yes, when you're looking for a job, say, but when you're looking for the right client, the next paycheck, when you're a freelancer in particular, which I have been for years now, it seems unthinkable that you would say no to a piece of work.
Well, yes. So on the one hand, say yes to more things. You know, do you want to go on a whitewater rafting with me? Yes.
Yeah.
And just do it. I like fun and cool stuff. Just be more out there and saying, you know, like, do you want to learn the tango? Yes. You know, like that sort of stuff. If you really feel excited about it. On the other hand, understanding where your boundaries are, what you don't want to do, and then let people or opportunities down in a very kind way and say, no, this is really not me. And I sort of describe it as, I understand where my North Star is, right? It's 90 degrees right in front of me. And then I sort of picture two white lines to the left and to the right of me. And my opportunities are anywhere on this 360 degree. So there should be under 180 in front of me. And opportunities that sort of gets me away from where I want to go, I have to say a clear, hard no to. But sometimes there are opportunities that are on this field. You know, let's just say you want to make a movie and you want to be a movie director, you want to do this movie project, that's right there. You want to be a director. But you can't get there right today and you have to pay your rent, and maybe somebody offers you a job loading and unloading trucks on a movie set. That is sort of 10-20% degrees on this axis, right? And you're like, you can say yes to that, but you put a time limit to it.
Right.
And I call that meaningful endurance.
Yes, I have heard about this.
Right, so like, let's say if it's like 0 to 30%, a few weeks, a few months you can do that, but not for 5 years. But if there's being an assistant director to an actual movie director, you can do that for 5 years. So the closer it is to my ikigai, the longer, but it needs to have a time limit.
Right.
So you can say, you don't have to say no to everything except the North Star. That is unrealistic.
Unrealistic, yeah.
But if it's not your North Star, put a time limit to it. And just go, okay, I can do that for a year. And then stick to that.
Okay.
And just use that to get you closer to it, because it's already going in that direction. So it's just a little detour.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does make sense. I want to transition things now into what's happening for you right now. What are you passionate about? What's getting you out of bed in the morning? I want to hear more about your current day-to-day existence.
That's a good question. I have done this for a while now, and I have beautiful clients. And I am in the process of finding more balance. I've done a lot of pro bono, and I'm a people pleaser, and following my own advice, saying no, even to the most deserving, most beautiful people. If I don't have the capacity, I don't have the capacity. That's one. Then also being able to not take everything at heart, because I'm coming across some real tragic stories, and not let that affect me too deeply. That is something I'm working on right now. And I sat down the other day in November last year and sort of built my next 3 years, where I want to go in life, and like, where do I want to travel, who do I want to spend time with, like redoing my ikigai, focusing a little bit more, and how much money I want to earn, and what I want to see in abundance, and so on, and use this incredibly helpful tool, ChatGPT, like, of all things, and sort of bounced ideas and refined stuff. And the results are quite amazing. Like, ChatGPT is actually really, really good helping with the ikigai. I started a YouTube channel, which was extremely challenging, learned editing and all this sort of stuff, but also a lot of fun. I fired one client that wasn't quite in line, or actually turned out to be quite toxic, and that happens. And sort of freed up my life to work myself towards this aim. And there's two really exciting parts of that. Is that I want to do more group sessions, because right now it's only one-to-one. And I want to have more VIP clients, because they're the most rewarding relationships, like really be there for a founder, and like, you know, almost like being a co-CEO level. So having more VIP clients, having a good system to do pro bono as well. Like when founders come to me, have sort of my own benchmark as to who is very privileged, and, you know, even if they would benefit from my help, maybe I should choose this person. I have limited time, you know, this person is less privileged, maybe help them. Also, what's the startup about, if it's sort of in line with the change I want to see in the world. I want to do that, but for that I need to also not being distracted with too many clients that are on a lower tier. So I have a few, you know, the first class always pays for the whole flight sort of thing.
Sure, yeah.
And another thing that really excites me is I'm working towards founder retreats, where you sort of switch off your phone, and for 3 days you sort of come down, unpack, look at where you want to go, and then sort of start planning. And I want to foster cross-pollination between the founders.
Yeah, how do you envisage that working, the sort of different dynamics of different founders in one room? Like, how do you envisage that sort of playing out?
Well, I think I will have to figure out things as they come.
Yeah.
But from my experience back from the accelerators working with founders help founders, and they're all at different stages, and often you can facilitate them helping each other. And me coming in and sort of bringing concepts and ideas in there to facilitate something where people come out of that with a lot more clarity. And like one of my clients once said, Bonny, I think clarity is the cure, and I really like, can I use that again?
Yeah.
Right, because like that's it. Having clarity is probably the most important thing. Is when you're sort of not knowing what you're doing and you're trying everything, that's when it gets hard, right? So founder retreats, and I want to do them at beautiful places. You know, like maybe Aspen or Fiji or Tuscany, and like come together and have 15 founders spending 3 days and coming in quite exhausted and coming out a little calmer with a lot more clarity as how to structure the next year. And then come again next year, and then, you know, just like, okay, and maybe have check-ins in between. So again, I'm working towards that. I'm not quite there yet, but I can feel it.
You've got a book, you mentioned it before, Happy Founder. Tell me a bit about that, and I want to tie that in with another question, and I don't know if the book holds the answers or not, because I haven't read it yet. But it's a big question, it's a difficult question, but if you could put it down to what is the single biggest thing that founders are struggling with today, like what's the biggest factor for founders, what would you say that is?
There's probably no single thing that all founders have, but on the highest level, grinding harder usually doesn't help.
So you think there's an epidemic of misplaced effort, basically?
Yeah, so ask for help, you know? Get good people around you, ask for help, get good advice. Take a moment, step back 1 or 2 steps and look at what's really important, what really moves the needle, and then work on that.
It's interesting because the second you say to me, ask for help, because sometimes I find it really difficult to ask for help. And then I think about why is it I find it hard to ask for help? Because I don't in theory have a problem with it. I think for me it's that thing you talked about before, it's clarity. It's like, if I don't have clarity, I don't know what to ask for help with. Does that make sense?
Well, without going too much into stereotypes, but we are men, and we are sort of taught from small ages on that we always have to have all the answers, we have to be strong, and so on and so on. And men don't really understand the concept of just talking, right? So when somebody comes to us and talks about a problem, we immediately go into fixing mode, right?
Yeah.
So we are sort of conditioned that I have to have a specific question. Do you have a number 12 spanner, Harry? You know, and then no, I don't, or yes, I do. So like really, like I know exactly what I need, and I ask somebody for it.
Brutally functional.
Yeah, but just sitting down and saying, hey man, I'm not feeling so good lately. You know, to be honest, I've been crying last night and I don't really know why, and you know, and my relationships is also not, you know, it's a bit rocky, and I feel I try to be everything for everybody, and the more I do, the less love I get, and I feel blah blah blah. So like having that conversation and not expecting for you to fix. I know you can't fix it. You know, maybe you have something, maybe you don't, but like just sitting down and asking, or just talking, that's not something like women traditionally are much better at that. And there's to the point where they are, hey, I didn't ask you for help. I just want to talk. Like, what do you mean? Like, why are you talking to me if you don't want help? It's sort of, we should learn from each other in that respect. So that's number one. But also asking for help, you know, like that stereotype of me driving my car and sort of lost where I am, turning down the radio because I can't multitask. And there's somebody on the passenger seat knows exactly what, but I'm not asking because I have to solve this, right? And I think that's what traditionally is called a masculine trait, you know, like, because deep down I feared that if I show weakness, I won't be loved. You know, like my partner wants to see the strong Bonny that you know protects her and has all the answers, and that's so much bullshit. It's actually not true at all. But sort of for decades it felt like that, and female founders are so much more successful because they share, they ask, they have a more diverse team. They get so many things more right out of the gate because they grow up in a totally different manner to us. I'm not saying women or men are better or worse at something. It's just more of like our upbringing, and I think it gets less and less distinct. Like Gen Z grew up in a totally different way. To me, for example, like boys don't cry. How much? You know how hard it is for me to cry? I literally have to put on sad music or watch a really sad movie or like Wall-E or something like that for me to actually have a tear. And it's such a good act. Like crying is so good, but we still feel like super sheepish. And it's so fucking easy to be tough, like being the tough guy. Come on, you know, that's easy. But going like. I've been to this beautiful conference last year. There was a guy on stage, and he looked as tough as nails, like mohawk, tats everywhere, and he cried on stage. And I think that was probably the strongest I've ever seen a man be. Like really, like crying on stage. That was big. Like, you know, not just holding back tears, like he full out cried, and everybody applauded. You know, they really sort of like, wow, man, now we see you. And we find that hard. We find that so hard, and we find when we ask for help, we're seen as weak. And I think the opposite is true, actually.
Wall-E is a good one to cry to, though. If you are looking for a movie to cry to, I think Wall-E is the pick, to be fair. I guess I want to ask you, because we've just had this big conversation about, you know, mental health. We've had this conversation about all these toxic elements, trying not to do it by yourself, sharing and opening up and whatnot. But I guess if you are a founder that's got your head down the rabbit hole and you can't quite see the wood from the trees, what do you do? Like, what's the first step? Say someone doesn't want to go straight to a coach. How do you sort of mentally get yourself to a place where you're ready to kind of do the next right thing, if that's the right way of putting it?
That's pretty difficult, really good, but difficult question. It's different for everybody. You know, it really depends who you have around yourself. Maybe you have a good mate who sort of says, hey, this might be good for you. I would say, generally speaking, have a glass of water.
That's good.
like if you're really in a bad place, you're probably dehydrated, then get some sleep, 8 hours, you know, and if you don't have sleeping problems, try to get your rest in. And have a bit of play as well, and do something that used to be fun for you. And I was the CEO of my first web design company, right? And then I did my back in. I popped 5 discs in my spine, and I couldn't walk, and I was so much pain, and I was in bed under medication for like at least 2 months. And I thought that would be the end of my of my startup. And the opposite was true. It thrived without me micromanaging, trying to, I was in the way. I was literally, everybody knew what to do, and they did so well. And I learned that we feel that if we don't work so super hard and answer all these emails and do this thing, and I wanted to do this thing, I want to do, all these things I need to do right now, then everything will stop. And funnily enough, often it doesn't. And sort of stepping back, taking a breath first, you get a lot. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So don't run so fast.
It feels like a sprint though a lot of the time.
It feels like it's a marathon length sprint, and it's not true.
Yeah.
It's just not true. But how to get from that point to realizing that's a chasm that you have to bridge, and it's not easy. So what I often say is, try little bits. So there's the lean startup methodology, which is sort of try to figure out what doesn't work as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible. You can do that with your mental health as well. So I say, okay, go to a therapist for 1 hour. Pick one, go, talk. If you don't like it, walk out. And if you do the full hour and you didn't like it, don't ever do it again. Just do 1 hour. So rather than committing to therapy, you're committing to a really small test and see how it goes. And so you can sort of meditating, Pilates, yoga, whatever it is, go for a run, go for a swim, play soccer, football.
Damn right.
Just give it a little try.
Yeah.
Don't commit. Like, for example, you just said, I need to do this, I need to do that. So one of the things I learned really, really early, I had a good mentor when I was about 18, is switch from need to want. Just switch your language. Just change the perspective of how I see the world. And so he said, don't use need, don't use have to, just switch to I want.
Yeah.
I go oh, that sounds weird. So I want to do the dishes, I want to go to work, I want to get up.
Makes it motivating rather than pressuring.
I'm in control suddenly. I feel I'm moving from the lowest stage of consciousness, which is the world happens to me. Suddenly I move to the second stage where like I'm in control, right? Which is also not true. There's a third and a fourth stage where you realize that some things you can't control and you have to let go. But just get that step, just saying I want, suddenly I feel empowered. And I also feel when it's not true. I want to go to this birthday party of my wife's best friend. And I'm no, I don't actually. I feel that I really don't want to go. And you have these, when you say I need, you just go. And you sort of develop resentment and you grumpy through it. But now when you say I want, it becomes apparent to me that, hey, actually I don't want to go at all. I want to do something else instead. And then even if you're still going, at least you feel like the world becomes more honest around you as well. And just do that for an hour. And if that works, do it for a day. If that works, do it for a week. And before you know it, you have a much better feeling. You haven't changed anything around other than your language. And through brain science, we find more and more that the number one voice in our life is our own voice. So what we say, we believe.
All right, I've really enjoyed this. This has been really good, and
so do I, man.
Because I've worked with you, I have heard quite a lot of this before, but going over it again, reaffirming some of the stuff you said to me previously, putting it all together in one packaged conversation has been nice for me to go through actually, and also to remind me, because sometimes, like I said, you can just get so dragged into what you're doing that you don't maintain those principles, but they are important and they are helpful. But I thought before we finished, we could do a little fun sort of quick fire questionnaire.
All right.
So I hope that's okay. So we've got the first question I've written down here is, what's the worst startup advice you've ever heard?
Work harder. Actually, be tough is probably the worst. That's the opposite of what you should be. And the second one would be work harder. Well, they're sort of related.
But can I ask you then, so what replaces toughness? Is it a resilience? Is it, how would you frame that?
Well, I call it emotional core strength.
Right.
And the path to it is through it. You know, like you start with vulnerability and it gets worse before it gets better and it hurts, you know. You're going to the gym, obviously, and you know that feeling that the first time you go there, everything fucking hurts, right? And it's not a good experience and you might not ever want to go back again. But over time, you keep going, you start to love that pain. You're like, yeah, my arms, man. Oh.
Yeah.
You know, and you feel that the workout was good for you. Like, you know, you're growing, you're getting healthier and everything. So you learn to fall in love with the pain. And I tell a lot of my founders that comfort is the enemy. Comfort is that place where you don't grow, where you don't change. So always lean into your fears. And if you go too far and it hurts, pull back a little bit, but stay curious and sort of always have a little bit of pain in your life and start loving that pain on a emotional, growing as a human being level.
If you could go back to a time in your life when you were probably finding it the hardest, what age would that be, and what piece of advice would you give to that version of yourself?
Well, the age would have been 40-ish. You know, there's this midlife crisis time in people's lives, and it's like between 38 and 42 for some reason it happens.
I'm not there yet, but I expect it to.
Yeah, no, but and it's only a crisis if you don't manage it. If you see me driving around in a new Porsche and a
is that not managing it?
You know, so I'm not saying Porsche are great, but there's this time. I think the Buddhists say that until then, you worked off your previous karma, and then you start working on your next one. And that, like, I had this feeling of that I was pulled through life on a strong rubber band. Things just happened, and suddenly I had a house and 2 kids and this and that, and I don't really know how I ended up there. It wasn't really planned as such. It was just like one step in front of the other. And suddenly that rubber band snaps, and you stand there and go like, okay, what do I do with the other side of my life? And suddenly somebody says like, okay, you drive now, and I don't know how to drive. So that was the time where I had a lot of navel gazing, and I could, the beginning of a crisis. And my back injury sort of got me in touch with somebody who did, he wasn't, what do you call it, not chiropractor?
Oh yeah.
What are they called? Osteopath.
Yes.
He's an osteopath, but he also did meditation workshops. So that was my first thing, where I was like a guided meditation, going in a nice place and for a weekend, and I was like, wow, this is actually really interesting. And we found that my physical injury had a lot to do with how I feel about myself, sort of thing, like the connection between your emotions and your body and all. So that's how I got into that, through a crisis. You know, don't let a good crisis go unused, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I would have loved, if I had a time machine and sort of see myself and avoid all the complications of that, go and say, hey, Bonny, just ask for help, mate. It's just don't try to keep it together. You know, you're not alone. People love you. Tell them how you really feel. I think that doing that a lot earlier would have been really, really good.
What's one thing you believe that most people in business get completely wrong?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. There's a number of things in terms of symptoms. When we go back to root causes, is again, understand who you truly are and what your business is about and who you are selling to. Not a target group, not a cohort, but who are those human beings? A lot of people forget that we are emotional beings and we are driven by emotions. Most of our decisions are based on emotions. And you can do a lot better in business if you understand how people feel about things, and getting more clarity on other people's feelings, I would say.
All right, that sounds fair. I have one final thing I want to ask you about, because I think it's a good counterbalance to a lot of the things we've discussed today.
Yeah.
It's about what do healthy boundaries look like in business? Because we've used a lot of very emotive language. We've talked about trust. We've talked about trusting, people around us like brothers. Yeah. And it's, I can imagine for some people that don't know where to begin with this stuff. Yeah. It's like, where's the line with that? What does that look like? Can you get, without having a clear example in front of you, talk to me about what healthy boundaries look like in business? Yeah.
Good, really, really good question. So healthy boundaries are the next step after understanding who you are. Like, you need to understand what your values are. They sort of create those boundaries. They make you understand what goes and what doesn't. And suddenly you also have a better understanding what behavior you have in your vicinity, in your group of people that you interact with, what's okay and what's not, what's a healthy challenge and meaningful, and what is toxic behavior. Like, I used to be very passive aggressive, for example, and I still, when I'm stressed, I fall back to that sort of default setting, and I've got to be really careful with that. And being funny and being a class clown, being sarcastic sort of and passive aggressive sort of goes with that. Like, a lot of fun shows are based on passive aggressive behavior. So first I had to recognize that, to recognize it in others, because until then it was just funny. But I didn't realize that that's actually not good behavior by me. So the more I understand about myself, the more I understand about other people, what they're doing to me, and then sort of starting to say no, all the way to sometimes to the place where I actually broke up with friends. I said, like, I really love you, but I don't like you. And this relationship is draining my energy. And I don't see this getting any better. So I would like to pause that for the time being and maybe not see each other for some time. And that, again, this is like a friend, not a romantic relationship, but sort of moving people out of my life that cost too much energy. So how do I see where the boundaries are? I just said energy, right? When you hang out with somebody, after hanging out, do you feel drained or do you feel full of energy? That's a really good indicator. And don't just judge that on one experience because maybe we're just tired, but check it out for 3-4 times. Yeah. Just like, man, every time I hang out with that dude, I feel really drained. And that can be family members. That gets really, really tough. Because we have been trained to love our family and at all cost. And I've sort of come more to the belief that I choose my family. I'm born into a family, and I have beautiful friendships in that. But there's also people I, put on a bit of a distance, and I'm sort of gathering friends across the world. They're my chosen family, sort of thing. Okay. So the boundaries really help me. So it feels at first as if I set too strong boundaries, I will be very lonely because I'm losing all these people and I'm confronting them and I'm not confrontational, it's stressful. But the funny thing is, the stronger I have my boundaries, with kindness and love, right, the more attractive I become to the people I really want to be hanging out with. So it's sort of natural, you become magnetic to the right people as well. So you don't go looking for people, you are somebody and suddenly those people come.
Beautiful.
It's really interesting.
I love it. Bonny, I think that's everything I wrote down that I wanted to talk to you about today. This has been good. I hope you've enjoyed being interviewed by me. I'm on your channel, but this has been my interview.
I could do this much longer.
Yeah, we could.
I also have to go to the toilet and.
That's a good reason to end any conversation. But is there anything else you want to say or plug or anything before we wrap it?
Thank you so much for this.
Man.
Means the world to me.
No problem at all.
And really good questions. Actually, I had to think about them a little bit.
Good.
And let's do that again one day.
Definitely.